Hey, welcome to Hear God's Word. This is Michael Loinger. In this podcast, we study and dissect the Bible to better understand what it means and is trying to say. We'll cover theology and dig into the original meaning through language and word studies. We'll even discuss scientific and historical ties, but we'll always come back to the basics. There's so many layers to the Bible, and it's all important. So, if you want to hear what God has to say, then let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast again. We got a old friend on the podcast, Dave Aldridge.
What do you mean by old?
Well, today we'll be going through Genesis 6, and we'll be covering a topic that's been a long time coming, which is Noah's Ark.
Michael, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Definitely.
Always good to spend time with you.
Yeah,
I love it. And it's also very good to spend time with you in the Word. Yeah, I love it.
absolutely.
Yeah. Michael, this is when we're doing this recording right now, this is the week we had an eclipse. This wacky thing that, happened on, Monday, where in Illinois anyway, we didn't see the full thing. But it was one of those events where everybody's going crazy, going, hooray, hallelujah, what do you know? And for us, I don't know about for you, but for us, it's like, yeah, that's what God does.
Yeah.
He does that kind of stuff. And it scares the snot out of some people. But for a lot of times, this is what God is very capable of doing, and he's been doing it for way longer than we can imagine. And so a lot of people get kind of itchy when they look at or try to explain miraculous things that happen in the Bible, like this incredible flood.
Mm-hmm.
And they well, that's just weird. We're going to dismiss that, not talk about it. So Michael, I'm glad that you're asking me today to talk about what God does and what he did back in the day of the time of Noah.
Yeah, I was thinking just when you were talking about the eclipse and all, how as you were paralleling it to the flood in Noah's day, obviously it was, we could say, phenomenon. And a lot of times, for example, let's just say another one that a lot of people don't take literally is when the sun stood still in the book of Joshua. Maybe there is some sort of what we would say is a scientific explanation that, could have caused such a thing. But, in scripture, even in the book of Revelations especially, there's a lot of signs in the sky, like the moon turns to blood and other crazy things start happening. So, even if we just look into Earth's geology, we can see plenty of stuff has happened in history's past. So it's not really surprising that something like this.
I like the way you phrased it, Michael. A lot of crazy things happening. That's the phrase you used. Mm-hmm. But and we have to be honest as Christians. We have to be really honest. That we believe what the world would say are crazy things. For instance, the dead coming back to life and being raised from the dead. That's the cornerstone of our faith, the resurrection. We just celebrated Easter. And what does the world say about? Well, that's crazy, right? But he did. And there's evidence, beautiful, wonderful evidence for it. The forensic duty of the court, whether it's a court of law or the court of public opinion, is to look at the evidence. And there's ample evidence. And so eclipse, just one more piece of evidence, right?
Yeah.
I love it.
Definitely. And I'm also going to spend many weeks on this because the flood is a several chapter affair in scripture. And so I definitely want to cover several aspects. And as of for today, we're mainly focusing on the ark, the animals, but we'll also look at the bigger picture as well.
Yeah, good.
So, would you mind reading starting from 6:14?
Yeah, before I read, can I just kind of go into the backstory a little bit, just a reminder of what we're talking about, Noah.
Yeah.
And I love the way Noah is introduced in chapter 5 by his father naming him. His father's name is Lamech, and he fathered a son, called his name Noah. And this is in verse 28 of chapter 5. And he says this, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. That's basically before we get into this, it's a hearkening back to Genesis chapter 3, where the curse happened, right? And so we start to see the ultimate implications or complications, or the consequences of the curse starting to be multiplied right before our eyes here in chapter 6. God's starting to look at what's going on in his creation. The Lord saw, the multiplication. I mean, all these people are being multiplied. That's good. Be fruitful and multiply. Well, this is the fallen part. They were fallen, but they were being fruitful and multiplying.
Yeah.
And that's what God was seeing and what he was feeling. I mean, this is a pretty incredible passage here where we're seeing or hearing the heart of God. His grieving. The heart of God is just really sad about what he's made. And now he's going to do something about it. It's what, we often refer to something called the Great Reset. I guess it's a political term. But it's also a spiritual term. There is an incredible restart happening right here. And things had gotten so bad, so miserable. All right, Genesis 6:14-18. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Its breadth, 50 cubits, and its height, 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and set the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh which is in the breadth of life of heaven. Everything that is on earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you.
Cool. Thanks, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start breaking this down. So we were talking about how the world's probably worst point actually in history. Like, we talk about how things are bad now. Like it says just earlier, the world was filled with people that only thought evil all the time.
Right. Continually, right. Yeah, I appreciate the reminder of the juxtaposing of today with what happened then. It's funny, kind of, or ironic. I'm not sure exactly what the term is, but here you have the high watermark or the low watermark of humanity in terms of its morality, and then pretty soon we're going to have a high watermark. I mean, the high watermark. The continual list of adjectives describing the condition of humanity: wickedness of men, great on the earth, every intention, thoughts of hearts were evil continually. And then it says at the end of that, I mean, he's going to wipe out the earth, right? But there's one guy, and this is back in verse 8. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, the lifnei of the Lord. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. In other words, the Lord looked upon him, and he was actually able to see. Back in the Genesis chapter 1 and 2, and actually 2, humanity was made in God's image, and so when the eyes of the Lord looked upon Noah, there's one who reflected the character of God. Maybe he saw also the lament in Noah's heart of the condition of humanity. So when you and I talk about today, in Christians today, and looking at the condition of today, if we are lamenting, you can pretty much be sure that God is grieved as well. His heart is grieved of the conditions that we've seen. And yet, we also know that God, even then, certainly now, is sovereign. He's in control. He knows what he's doing, and he knows what he's done.
You brought up a good point. He was sovereign, as in powerful enough to create the entire world. And it's interesting you were talking about God looking with his eyes, because in the creation account, it talks about how God was looking and saw that things were good. And then when he made people, it was very good. But now, basically, there's nothing good except for only one person left,
Right.
It seems, or maybe one family.
You're right.
And so now that's where we're at, is God sees this one person, like, what if God let something happen to Noah? Like, what would have happened to the world? Would he have wiped everyone out and started 100% over? Well, would God have let something like that happen? I don't know, but it does show how God is in control. And even though it doesn't make sense that he would let things come to that, like, just look all around us. God lets so many horrible and evil things happen. And it seemed like it had been persisting for quite a while, because here, getting into verse 14 now, God specifically notices that there's actually something, like you were saying, he found grace with him. So he found that there was something acceptable about Noah, whereas there wasn't with any other person.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't work with, he couldn't speak with anyone else. No one else seemed to have been listening to God at that point. And we'll come back around to that specifically at the end in verse 22, actually.
Yeah. Good.
Which will be in the next episode. But just wanted to hint at that right now, that basically God is giving Noah some instructions on building what we call an ark. So we can spend a little bit of time talking about this. I know, Dave, you've done a little bit of projects in the past,
Mm-hmm.
working with some wood and tools and things of the sort. And here Noah's asked to build something with wood.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what kind of stuff have you worked on in the past?
Where we live in Woodstock, we have some acreage and make a long story short, I really wanted to build a barn for my wife. She is she's horse crazy, and wanted to, build something bigger than a lean-to for my wife and for some horses. And so I've built stuff before, and I knew that before I started going, I needed to kind of really lean on, certainly prayer, and lean on God, but also understand that God has something like order. He makes order out of chaos, and he really, when we build something, we need to have a foundation. We need to know where we're going to put it. All of the details as to, how big, what do you need, where do you want to put it? I needed to check with the county make sure that the building I wanted to build was okay, and in terms of their approval, get their salute, and they wanted to make sure I had drawings too. They wanted to make sure that I was going to do something, according to code. And so I want to sort of share a sidebar story. Back in I think it was 2010 or maybe later, there was a hurricane that blew through Long Island where we lived at one time, and we had a friend who was an architect on Long Island. She built a house right close to the shore on Long Island. And so Hurricane Sandy was blowing up the East Coast, and she, devoted Christian, she said she laid her hand, she had to evacuate, she laid her hand on the front door and said, Lord, I've built my life upon your code, your word, and I've built this house according to the code. Please help this house to stand. And she and her family packed in the car and they took off and they went, evacuated and went somewhere on higher ground or I don't know where they went. And the Hurricane Sandy blew through and just about wiped out the East Coast. Unbelievable. If you were to drive up and down the streets of the Long Island stretch where she lived, you would see a devastation, house after house after house leveled. When she came back, she and her family were driving, and their jaws just dropped wide, dropped right to the bottom, looking at all the mess, except their house. Their house was the only one standing. Why? She built it according to the code. And that stuck with me. When I was building my barn, I said, you know what? Don't be a knucklehead. I can go knucklehead quick. And so I said, all right, Lord, I need to make sure that this is north and south and east and west. I need to measure. And I think I took maybe, I don't know how many months, walking around the property, making sure I knew exactly where to lay this dog. And then to make sure that the measurements that I had for each point where I was going to dig holes and drill down for a foundation, I needed to make sure that they were right and square. So yeah, square, level, plumb, all of that stuff. And so when I started building, I felt as if I was tracking with God's plan. Now that's where we're kind of taking, I think that's where you wanted me to go with Noah, because guess what? He's been given some very specific instructions.
Yeah, let's actually start with that. That's an amazing story. And so you were mentioning a few different terms, directions, instructions. And one thing that I learned that's really powerful is, so let's jump to verse 22 at the end of the chapter.
Yeah, good.
It says, thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him. The word commanded can also be translated instructed or directed. So he did everything as he was instructed by God. And you were saying how your friend, they had built everything to code or basically to law. And the book of Genesis is actually part of the Torah, which is also called the law. So this is basically the book of the law here. Right. And here we have Noah sandwiched in, and he is listening to what God has to say. It says even that he was blameless and righteous. So he was doing things the right way. He was doing things according to what he'd been instructed to do. And I just think that's an amazing parallel.
And I think it's important to remind ourselves that when God gives law, it's not devoid of love. In fact, it's part of his love. It is his love. Yeah. When we obey his commandments, it's good for us. Yeah. When we look at this ark, this is important. God still loves the world. He absolutely loves the world, and he loves what he's going to do to redeem this world. When Noah is in that ark, what is he carrying? He's carrying the animals. He's going to carry them all 2 by 2, etc. What else is he carrying? He's carrying his family, his wife, and his sons. but he's also carrying the promise. In his loins, in his seed, if you will, he's going to be carrying the Messiah. And that Messiah is going to be traveling all the way from Genesis 3 or before, the Ancient of Days we call him, from before time, and all the way through history. The train tracks are being laid already way ahead of Noah's life.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing that even though God could have restarted a different project, he knew exactly when and where and how to perfectly execute things, and he had worked with the individual that he wanted to make everything happen with. And it's amazing how Noah, even just himself, was willing to stand seemingly against everyone else around him. And it said that he was blameless in all of his generation. And obviously, nowadays we have plenty of people around us, even though sometimes it seems like there's not a lot of good or righteous people. There's at least plenty of people we can surround ourselves with. If you look hard enough and try and find people.
Right. We need to trust in some people that are friends. When we look at Noah, he's not blameless in terms of of Jesus.
Yeah, we had talked about that, how he was holistic and whole in the way that even though he almost guaranteed made plenty of mistakes before and after, he definitely makes some mistakes after the flood, but and we'll eventually get to that.
I can't help but look at Noah as a great role model in so many ways. When I was building my barn, I can't tell you how many oopses I had, where I would put up an entire, wall, and I'd go, oops, and I'd have to undo it and tear it down and do it up again. And I'm thinking, man, well, and then I realized, well, it took him 100 years, so maybe he had a few oopses. Now, once I had a men's Bible study I was leading in New York when we were in New York. And we had one guy, Albert Turo, who was an owner of a precision metal manufacturing company. And he was always upset when we were going through Genesis. He was very upset because there's nobody in the Old Testament that was a pure, really good role model. Abraham had a lot of foibles. Moses killed somebody.
Correct.
David, slept with Bathsheba. And you're like, where's the men? I need a godly man. And I thought, well, Noah's not bad. I mean, it's not bad.
He's as close as you get. I think we could maybe say Enoch, because it doesn't have too much to say about him. The less said, the better in the Bible, because eventually you'll get to the bad stuff. Yeah,
I love that.
With humans, the less you know about them, the better. Probably.
I love Albert's complaint. Right. We're looking for men in our lives to surround ourselves with, at least out of the scriptures, that we just need guys that were a little bit ahead of us, just to kind of model for us and encourage and inspire us a little bit towards what I would call godliness, holiness, the fear of God, obedience to the word. I think I get inspired when I hear or see a godly man. And so when we look at Noah, there's a guy who was a standout because, well, one, the competition was not exactly showing up for the game. I mean, they were all wicked. I mean, the moral high water mark was not set by the community. He was doing it. He was setting it. And so on the other hand, he was not. It didn't seem to be. It doesn't sound like he was affected at all by. That Romans 2 passage, do not be conformed by the patterns of the world around you. Noah was living that exactly.
Yeah, he was following the pattern that God was setting in front of him. And I am currently reading a book called The Measure of a Man by Gene Getz, and it goes over characteristics that Paul, who wrote several books in the New Testament, he gave a few lists of characteristics that is good to look for when looking for leaders in the church and elders and anyone who wants to have any sort of position and authority and lead other people. And basically, the guy who wrote the book was mentoring and looking to raise up men so that they can be godly men, good examples, their
Doesn't
families,
the church
to the
need
church.
that? I can't tell you, Michael. Amen.
The first characteristic that is given is the one of being above reproach, which in Greek basically means blameless. And so that links back to what we're talking about. It essentially is the character quality of, even though it both means blameless and whole in Hebrew, it has that sense of like, because someone doesn't have anything that you can really blame them for, like, someone may have messed up with this and that, but you can't really, when you get down to it, dig anything on them because there's nothing there. They're actually living with integrity, and that's the quality that Noah had.
When as a leader in the church, it is so important for us to have co-leaders, people that are like you say, that I appreciate Getz's book, because the church needs pastors, need other servants of the Lord. I think particularly men who are leaders not only in their family and their community, but also leaders in the church. One guy in particular that sticks down in my mind is a gentleman named Les Park. Les was a leader in the charitable world. He worked with people with multiple muscular dystrophy for years. But he was also one of the leaders and elders of the church where I served in New York. And he taught Scripture Sunday school every week for years. And they loved his class because it was right from the Word. It was just, he was a godly man, a godly father, a godly leader in the community, and a godly leader in the church. And man, he was like a Noah, not conformed to the patterns of the world around him. He was very influential in a lot of different ways. And so, yeah, we need, again, to the point is, we need godly men like Noah. And God saw that in him. He saw, and he found favor in God's eyes. Now, in this passage, we have the details, the building details that, we see the cubits. Effectively, you could fit this ark inside the old historic Soldier Field in Chicago, the old one, where it's 450 feet long, about 75 feet wide, and about 4 stories tall. That's tall. That's wide, and that's really long, and that's really big. And so then you hear something that this is the first reference to it in the Scriptures. I'm not sure if it's the only time that the covenant itself comes forth, but this is the first time we hear the Hebrew word berith, which is, I shall make a berith, a covenant with you. Now, Michael, what do you make of that? You're schooled in Hebrew. And this is the first time we actually hear that word in the Old Testament, where God is actually, he is the one that's initiating the covenant with Noah. Usually it's the lesser who is pleading with the greater to make a covenant with the greater. Now it's God taking. What do you think of that happening here?
Yeah. So let's talk about it in general, and then once we get to talking about the details of the ark, we'll come back to it. But yeah, the fact that God is working with Noah, essentially covenants, in other words, are kind of like an alliance or a treaty. So God's not going to make a treaty with all these people doing evil. Like, he doesn't want to partner with them by any stretch. Like, oh, let me when I flood things so that I can destroy all the evil, I just really want to make sure that all the bad people survive.
Yeah, we'll spare a few of them that are kind of bad, not altogether bad. Let's see if we can negotiate this. Doesn't do that.
Just as when, like we talked about, we can talk a little more about it later, but the fact that Noah has integrity and he has the kind of characteristic that God is looking for, God is choosing, like it said, that God made the covenant. He's choosing to partner with Noah. And so because he's partnering with him, he's saying, essentially, by helping him construct an ark, he's giving him a heads up where he's not giving anyone else a heads up about what's to come. And it is true through the Bible that there are certain people who are connected with God. Like, for example, Moses, who I'm reading right now, when the plagues came, they got very little warning. The Egyptians did, whereas Moses and Aaron at least had a little more warning. They were able to help the Israelite people because God had a covenant with them. So they were able to prep and save themselves from most of the disaster that came on the Egyptians for basically mistreating them as slaves. But yeah, here I'm sure that Noah, as you were saying earlier, he probably did have some thoughts of fear, or he probably did get shaken up a few times since there was evil going on all around him. It seems as if, he might have been able to get along with people to a certain extent, because it doesn't say whether or not he built the ark all by himself or whether he did have some helping hands. Hey, if I give you guys a bunch of money, will you? Oh, yeah, we love money. Yeah, we'll help you build this stupid boat you want. I mean, it's your money.
I'm picturing when I was finishing the second floor of my little barn, I needed my son. And I'm glad that Noah had some sons so I could rely on my kid and say, hey, James, hold this big beam for me, will you? While I try to nail it over here. A couple of times I needed help. So even my wife Sarah helped me build it. I had some cousins, some of James's cousins. They came over. My brother came over to help. But for the most part, I had to build this thing. Now back to this notion of the covenant. The thing that strikes me about covenants, ancient covenants back in that civilization, was always between two different parties. You use the word partners. I believe you're right. God was looking on the face of the earth for somebody he could work with. In the terminology of today, God saw he saw Noah and said, now here's a man I can work with. Now he wants to protect Noah because Noah is carrying the promised Messiah in his loins. And he's going to protect creation as well. And he's going to protect Noah's family. Interesting. Noah already had 3 sons, right?
Yeah.
So why does God bother with Noah's wife? Well, either she was good, or because this is beautiful. This is the beautiful Hebraic understanding, the deep value of family and of marriage and of women. Whereas the cultures that were apart from the Hebrew culture were devoid of any respect for women. And, they would have cast, the women aside unless they were able to do nothing but childbearing. Well, she's already born children. Well, we don't need her on the ark. She's going to be dead weight. No, I don't think so. God's saying, no, we're going to put her on board too. Guess what? Yeah. Noah needs her.
Yeah, and it's clear that and talks about that Ham, Shem, Japheth also get to take their wives
as well.
Yep.
Gee. So it's marriage, family, extremely valuable to God.
Yeah, whether or not they were part of the righteous group, or if it was just Noah and God was just like their family, they're at least obliging and working with Noah and peaceable with them.
One of these boys, Noah, one of Noah's sons. Which
God
one?
was willing to save the whole family.
Yeah, and he's willing to save the world. This is the Savior of the world coming through the pike.
Yeah.
Now, it's gonna travel through the house of Abraham too, and God is going to get a hold of Abraham, and he'll do the same. Berith. Well, the other thing about Berith, the covenant business, is that when there's an establishment of a covenant, something has to die. What is dying here? Well, life is dying. The work that God has created has got to die, which absolutely breaks God's heart. Also, at the end of it, you'll get to it. There'll be an altar, and there'll be a sacrifice then too. But that's on the act of Noah's part.
Yeah.
Here we're seeing the sacrifice that God is making on behalf of His beloved remaining family that carries with them the promised seed. Again, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to do a little homework as to which one of the three sons carries the seed through the genealogy all the way to Jesus. I know it's in there somewhere. I don't know if it's in Luke or Matthew. One of those two genealogies will tell you, maybe both. But no, I think it's Luke, because in Matthew it starts with Abraham. Mm-hmm. So in Luke's gospel, we'll find the particular son that carries the Messiah. But again, what is God doing? God is in charge. He's upset, and he's grieving. This is a different God from all of the other gods that the world has manufactured. This is a God who absolutely is he's in love with his creation. He created it in love. It's not this sort of battle of chaos between the gods that are, warring against one another. And this is a God who created the world in love.
Yeah, let's back up and talk about the context yet again, because I wanted to address the side of talking about God's love. If God did love the world that He made, how come He wasn't willing to, do something a little more to, help save all of these other wicked people or change them? And I think that one thing that's easy to miss is sometimes it's easy to forget what you read about just, 20 verses or 14 verses before. It was talking about how basically there was this really weird event that happened at the beginning of Genesis 6 with these intermingling of sons of God. And and this produced the Nephilim, and we've spent a lot of time talking about that. But if the whole earth had been physically corrupted, like even on like a DNA and spiritual level, to where it had been messed up, and maybe even every person except for Noah possibly could have been corrupted by whatever all of these crazy things going on with the sons of God and the daughters of men and the Nephilim. It's clear that a lot of the evil that was happening was because of this event that started things up. And one other thing that I never even talked about was how in verse 12 it talks about how when God did look at the earth and it was corrupt, it specifically says the earth, which refers to, the earth or the world itself, the land itself. It even become corrupt. You know, we see nowadays we're also corrupting the earth by a lot of pollution and digging of natural resources irresponsibly at times. You know, sometimes it's good usage and it really blesses humanity, but then sometimes people are greedy and take things too far and end up harming the ecosystem and humans that live, you know, in certain regions. And
so we're seeing that here.
And then it says all flesh, which also includes animals. And we were talking before, because we're about to talk about the animals in the next episode. But, you know, like, what about the dinosaurs? You know, what happened to them? Did they get on the ark? You know, since most likely Adam and Eve, Noah actually lived during the time where there were still dinosaurs in existence, the earth, even animal wise, had probably become a pretty wild and corrupt place.
Yeah, that's a great reminder of the implications or complications or the consequences of human sin. When we sin, it's not just offense against us or against one person. The earth gets corrupt. The reason why that when Adam had to toil in his work was because of sin. Isn't it interesting? Suddenly the earth is corrupted because of sin. The soil is going to be difficult to work. The created order is no longer going to be easy to work with, and as a partner. No, we have to tame them.
Yeah, this all links together.
Yeah. So it was God, right? So when God is looking and He sees, and it's right there. It is.
Even
verse
Jesus,
11,
like you were talking about, coming later in Noah's seed or descendants.
Yeah. Now, isn't it interesting that when Palm Sunday shows up, Jesus hops, this is just an aside, but Jesus tells the guys, we're going to set the table. I need you to go into town, borrow this man's donkey. It's a donkey that's never been ridden. I had 2 donkeys once, and they had never been ridden. And if I tried to ride one of those donkeys, it would have thrown me over the fence into the next county. So that's one of the miracles on Palm Sunday, is that Jesus hopped on the donkey and rode it quietly into town, even though everybody was going crazy, shouting.
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Now that you say that, that's...
One of the commentators or one of the pastors I recently heard said was because you've got the Word made flesh, the creator of the world riding on that donkey. And the donkey is really exemplifying what Paul refers to in Romans 8, that the creation is waiting with eager expectation for the sons of men to come along.
Yes. So let's get back to Noah and the ark, and even your friend who had prayed over their home during the hurricane.
Yeah.
The fact of God is working with this individual, or God was working through your friend. They were having a connection and a story with God, and they were trusting Him even though they didn't see the future in advance. They were getting clues from God of what they should do. Noah was being given instructions and clues and saying, hey, there is going to be a flood. You should build an ark, and here's how you should build it. Obviously, if you want to save your family and yourself and
yes, that's
your
right,
friend.
Michael. How are we building our lives? I think that's a great question, and we're seeing Noah doing it exactly the way God commanded him. And it wasn't just so that I can, salute God and obey His commands. It was because he was going to be riding in that, living in that, and surviving this. He has to survive this flood. So he's not just obeying the code, so to speak, although he is obeying the code, but he's obeying it for his own good. In the year 2010, I think it was, Haiti went through this massive earthquake, and it wiped out. There were hundreds of thousands of people that died. Hundreds of thousands of people that died in an earthquake in Port-au-Prince, or very close to Port-au-Prince. And And the lesson that needed to be learned was from thenceforth, both in Haiti and also in Syria. I think it was about a year ago, there was a massive earthquake in Syria. The lesson learned is obvious. You got to build according to code. They were not building according to code, and it was devastating. Haiti, in particular, lost so many lives. You were going to share a story.
Yeah. I have a friend, as I was saying, who grew up in Haiti, and he moved here several years ago. And during the earthquake,
that was
he got buried several feet underground, and thankfully he was physically okay. I'm pretty sure he had at least some scruffs or so afterwards, but he was buried underneath enough rubble to where he couldn't move for 2 straight days while they were searching. It was pitch black, he said, and the only thing that he had going for him is he had one other friend who was close to, if not maybe hand reaching distance.
They could hear each other?
They could hear each other.
Oh, man.
And I know that hearing that story just completely terrified me. That's a incredibly scary thing to go through, and the fact that he gives God credit for the fact that he survived it.
That's amazing. And this is what we're talking about. Noah is to build something according to code, so that he's not going to have to be rescued and pulled out of the waters, out of the bottom of the waters. He's going to ride on this ark. It's not a traveling boat. It's a floating
survival boat.
Right,
yeah.
It's a survival boat, and it's interesting how God made sure that it was waterproof.
Yeah,
with pitch. In other words, it's going to have to take and survive not only a flood but a lot of rain.
So I wanted to shift gears a little bit back one more time to go straight through the construction specific aspect of the ark, because a lot of times there are details about it that people don't understand or get confused about. And so I want to start off with a clip from Ark Encounters, which is an organization that's spent a lot of time researching specifically relating to the Ark and flood and things of the sort.
Previously on the Genesis account of Noah's Ark, we delved into the idea of whether Noah's Ark and the flood were believable, what the actual size of Noah's Ark was, and what kind and how many animals were on board. Join us now as we explore the possible shape and construction of Noah's Ark and what its ability to survive such a catastrophic experience would have been in part 2 of the Genesis account of Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark has been depicted in a wide variety of ways over the years, even among the Christian church. And this is likely because, in contrast to other divinely specified constructions in the Bible, which are meticulously detailed, like the descriptions of Moses' tabernacle or the temple in Ezekiel's vision, the description of the ark in Genesis 6 is very brief and consists of verses 14, 15, and 16. However, even though they're brief and contain only simple information about the ark, the data given is critical. And although these verses only contain the ark's overall dimensions, Noah was almost certainly given more detail than this. It's important to realize what is not explicitly stated here, because despite the minimal description, the Bible doesn't specifically say the ark was a rectangular box. In fact, Scripture gives no clue about the exact shape of Noah's Ark other than the proportions, length, width, and depth. We need to recognize that ships have long been described like this without ever implying a squared, block-shaped hull. The patriarch Moses, the writer of the account, used the obscure Hebrew term teba to describe the ark, a word that is only used again for the basket that carried him as a baby down the Nile in Exodus 2, verse 3. So the same word was used to describe both a huge wooden ship and a tiny pitch-coated wicker reed basket. And we can be quite sure that the baby basket didn't have the same proportions as the ark. And Egyptian baskets of the time were typically rounded. Other than that, they both float, both rescue life, and both are covered. The similarity ends there. So perhaps Teba simply means lifeboat. For several centuries, many biblical depictions simply portrayed Noah's Ark as a rectangular box. And this shape helped illustrate its size, and it made it easy to compare volume. By using a short cubit and the maximum number of animal kinds, Christians could easily demonstrate how the ark could fit the biological payload required according to the Bible's specifications. And most of the time, most people felt space was the main issue, and other factors were considered as more secondary in nature. However, another more modern phase of research focused on demonstrating the ark's feasibility and investigated other key factors, such as seakeeping, which encompasses behavior and comfort of passengers at sea, its hull strength, and overall stability. Surprisingly for many, this began with a study performed at a world-class ship research center in 1992, the Korean Research Institute of Ships and Ocean Engineering, or KRISO. And the team of 9 KRISO researchers was led by Dr. Hong, who's now Director General of the Research Center in Korea. The study combined analysis, model wave testing, and ship standards, yet the big picture conceptually was simple. Compare the biblical ark with 12 other vessels of the same volume, but modified in length, width, or depth. 3 qualities were measured: stability, hull strength, and comfort. And the takeaway conclusion from the study was the confirmation that the ark could handle immense waves as high as 98 feet tall, and that the proportions of the biblical ark are near optimal, which was an interesting admission from Dr. Hong, who believed evolutionary ideas. While Noah's Ark was only an average performer in each separate quality, it was amongst the best designs overall. In other words, the proportions show a careful design balance that's easily lost when proportions are modified the wrong way. It's no surprise that modern ships have similar proportions. Why do most ships look like most ships? Because those general proportions work. Interesting to note is the fact that this study makes nonsense of the claim that Genesis was written only a few centuries before Christ and was based on flood legends such as the commonly touted Epic of Gilgamesh. In it, the Babylonian Ark is a cube shape, something so far from reality that even the shortest hull in the aforementioned Korean study wasn't even close. But we would expect mistakes from other flood accounts, like that of Gilgamesh, as the scriptural account of Noah would have been appropriated and distorted as it was passed down through different cultures. But one mystery remained. The Korean study was quite thorough and honest, and didn't hide the fact that some shorter hulls slightly outperformed the biblical Noah's Ark. Why would that be if this was a work commissioned by God? Well, further work by 2 naval architects, Jim King and Dr. Alan Magnuson, as well as by Noah's Ark specialist Tim Lovett, focused attention on a key and dangerous issue: the idea of broaching, a vessel being turned sideways by the waves and being beaten apart by the tremendous force pounding into its hull. Shipbuilders know that this problem can be overcome to a great degree by certain specific and clever design features. You see, the Bible says in Genesis 8:1 that after several months at sea, God sent a wind, which could have produced very large waves, since these can result from a strong, steady wind. And open water testing confirms that any drifting vessel will naturally turn side on to the waves and broach. With a sea and waves approaching the side of the vessel, whose surface motion is approximately at a right angle to the course of a vessel, called a beam sea, a long vessel like the Ark would be trapped in an uncomfortable situation, and in heavy weather it could become extremely dangerous. This could be overcome, however, by the vessel catching the wind at the bow and gathering the water at the stern, aligning itself like a wind vane. And this specific design can be seen in many other ancient ship designs that came after, perhaps inspired by the Ark itself. If this was the case, as the wind aligned the Ark so it pointed into the waves, the long ship-like proportions would create a much more comfortable and controlled voyage for all on board. Now, some might ask, how do we know what the waves were like? Well, if there were no waves at all, stability, comfort, or strength would be unimportant, and the proportions simply wouldn't matter. Remember, the Great Ark had no specific destination, and with nowhere to arrive to at a certain time, and traveling slowly with the wind, it had no need for speed. However, the Bible does say the ark moved about on the surface of the waters in Genesis 7:18. However, not all waves are aligned with the local wind, so the ark may have also encountered distant swells from other directions. So the first line of defense would come from the excellent proportions of the ark, confirmed in the study by the world-class Ship Research Center in Korea. In addition, the outer keels that provide protection on land also improve roll damping in the waves, much like the bilge keels of a modern ship. With all of the potential perils he would face, it would have been prudent for Noah to put lots of ancient ingenuity into the project of his life. So as we can see, although a possibility, the familiar box-shaped ark doesn't make a lot of sense. Compared to a ship-like bow and stern, blunt ends aren't as strong, have edges that are vulnerable to damage during launch and beaching, and would likely have given a rougher ride. And since the Bible gives proportions like that of a true ship, it makes sense that it would have looked and acted ship-like. The design depicted is an attempt to flesh out the biblical outline using real-life experiments and archaeological evidence of ancient ships. While Scripture doesn't point out a wind-catching feature at the bow, neither does the abbreviated account we're given in Genesis make mention of drinking water, the exact number of animals, or the way they got out of the ark either. So nothing in this newer depiction of the ark contradicts Scripture. In fact, it shows how accurate Scripture is, since the proportions are so realistic. The bottom line is, Noah's ark was ideally suited to survive the catastrophic event that was Noah's flood. Of course, another real-life consideration sometimes brought up is that another type of wave may have also affected the ark during the flood: tsunamis. Earthquakes can create tsunamis that devastate coastlines. However, the Bible states, "Now the flood was on the earth 40 days. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth," in Genesis 7:17. So if launched from high ground by the rising floodwaters, the ark would have avoided the initial devastation of coastlines and low-lying areas, and would likely have remained safe from tsunamis throughout the voyage. When a tsunami travels in deep water, it's imperceptible to a ship. During the flood, the water would of course have been very, very deep. And this leads to another common question and objection asked and brought against the plausibility of the flood account. Where did all that water go? Join us next time as we explore where did all the water go, as well as answer questions as to whether Noah's flood might have been a local rather than a worldwide event, as some have proposed, in part 3 of the Genesis account of Noah's Ark.
So let's have a round now of talking about the instructions, the practical ark instructions. So let's say, God tasks you to make something like this.
Yeah.
We were talking a little bit about that.
I built a barn.
You'd probably need more than just yourself to build something
Yeah.
450 feet long.
I needed to make sure that I had 4 feet into the ground. I had to have concrete with rebar. And that's what the foundation. And to set the verticals on those. And the verticals themselves, I was coached by a guy who really knows how to build barns. I was coached on how to build the posts so that they were going to be able to withstand wind. They're going to withstand age. They have to be treated lumber. This wood that Noah is working with, specific kind of wood, right?
Yeah. So we'll talk about it now. So the ark was, like we said, 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high. So that's a pretty nice size. And it says even later that there were 3 decks to it, which is why they had it 45 feet tall. But in most Bible versions, you'll notice, it doesn't say feet, it says cubits. Well, let's get into some of the details of the words in scripture, because I know a lot of people have probably read the story a bunch of times and they're always confused. What's gopher wood? What are cubits? What's this? What's that? So starting specifically with even the word ark, let's talk about that first. We've been talking and assuming like everyone knows exactly what an ark is. Honestly, we don't even know exactly what the ark looks like. There's a very good reconstruction project that's out in Kentucky that you can go visit. And
I love it.
Do you remember the name of the place?
No, I should, because I had just had a friend invite me to take a trip down there with him. It's remarkable that there's some people who I think wisely are trying to give that a go. They're trying to give it a go so that we can really picture in our own hearts and minds what this is like, the enormity of it, the complexity of it,
the scientific stability of how it practically could have been constructed. And I said could have been because some people suggest that it's a different shape. Some people suggest that it's in a longer fashion and dimension. And it does actually show that. Some people look at some of these other flood tales and they're thinking that, maybe it could have been, a circular arc, but here we can shut that down.
They're missing the point.
It does have details.
The details
in here
are right. The details are given by God and for a reason.
Yeah.
Pitch we talked about, but gopher wood, what's the reason for gopher wood?
Yeah. So first off, there's so many different tales and stories that basically show there was some kind of crazy flood that happened, and there was someone who built some kind of life vessel or boat or ark or whatever kind of term you want to use. But I actually wanted to make one more parallel before we jump into specifically how God told Noah to construct it, and that's that the very same term used for the ark that God told Noah to build is actually the same term that was used for Moses when he was laid in the basket on the river floating down the Nile, which I just learned recently. And so basically, whether it's 450 feet big or a basket just big enough to hold a baby, an ark or it's essentially a lifeboat for the water is what the ark is. Like that's its function. Is the only thing God was trying to do was preserve the life inside of it. And that's what Moses, who most of you probably know that story as well, that he was put in a little basket by his mother, floated down the Nile. And one other thing that I learned is that the term itself is actually an Egyptian loan word that the Hebrews took in, or at least it seems, or who knows, it could have been vice versa. The Hebrews could have possibly had influenced and caused the Egyptians to have used a similar word. But anyways, that being the point, just that there's that connection of the lifeboat aspect of it, that's what the ark is. And we do actually, now getting into it, have some of the details on, what did it look like for Noah specifically. And starting off, it says that he was supposed to build it of gopher wood. Do you know what gopher wood is?
No. I've heard, and I can't remember where or when, but it was perfect construction wood. Meaning it's light enough to float, strong enough to build. A good combination, a good kind of a hybrid wood where you can fit things together and it will stick, it will hold, and it will float, which is kind of important given the fact that you don't want wood that's going to sink. Not that wood sinks, but you want it to be loaded, strong enough to be loaded with all kinds of critters, and then to be able to survive.
Yeah, there's two things with that I wanted to talk about. So it's possible there could have even been, there was obviously woodworking in general when it comes to making the ark. That's obviously no doubt. But another aspect I wanted to touch on is how a lot of people refuse to believe or buy anything about the ark story because they believe, how did they have the technology to be able to, do a project like that? How did they have the material and the resources? And we talked about in previous weeks all of these crazy things that were happening with the Nephilim. And we even, in one of the bonus episodes, talked about, some of those rock formations that you see, that there's boulders that are like thousands and thousands of pounds that came from a totally different side of an island, and you wonder how in the world did those things get there in ancient times? Like, so they weren't stupid. They didn't not have technology back in these times, and I think we highly misunderestimate and misevaluate the past and what they were capable of.
And the speed with which humanity doubts is based on what? I don't know. It's just based on unbelief. Sometimes I wonder why I think John Calvin said, why are we bothering trying to justify Scripture to people who don't believe? They're not even leaning, they're leaning the other direction. One of the beautiful things that I discovered was in the middle of Missouri. Missouri is not anywhere near an ocean, right?
No.
As far away from an ocean as you can find. And in the middle of Missouri, there's some cliffs, high cliffs, where you can see for miles. And the edge of the cliff, you can find fossils, ocean beings in fossils in the middle of Missouri on a cliff.
That's wonderful. How could that have happened?
There's a story. And the Native Americans said before their time, the story is that there was a flood. The Epic of Gilgamesh is another ancient story that talks very vaguely about a huge monumental flood. Well, gee, I wonder when that happened.
All the ancient civilizations knew about it, but through sometimes I think our superiority mindset that we have figured out everything about the past, and people back in the day were stupid cavemen who made up stories and myths. Right. Obviously stuff was fabricated and in different aspects or different stories, or they forgot some of the details.
We're smart now. We're so progressive, and we've gotten ourselves over that. The only problem is we are continually still destroying the earth. So, how much have we progressed? Oh, man.
So getting back to the gopher wood, like you were talking about, I have also seen, especially in a lot of Bible translations, most of them usually say either cedar, and when you look up some of the notes, some of it says cypress. And you actually brought up something that I hadn't heard, and it's possible, just like we have plywood, it's taking and making a even more conducive board for certain uses. Like you said, that's very possible that that's what gopher wood was, because gopher wood is actually a Hebrew word, and it could have been a specific type of wood that is not really known in our vocabulary. Maybe it's true of Hebrew today as well. They don't have this word specifically for a specific kind of wood in their current vocabulary. So in other words, it's basically lost in translation for exactly the equivalent of what it is today. And even if, like you said, Dave, it is a kind of wood that is more so, I guess, a retextured sort of wood, of making it into something that's fit for a specific kind of woodwork usage, then yeah. Another thing about it is you brought up a good point with that, which is whatever gopher wood was, it had to be very flamboyant and able to float in water. Obviously, wood does that naturally, but there are certain types of woods that do even better in certain conditions and hold up better as well, especially when the flood would have had raging waves slamming against it. And so then that gets into the next aspect of it, which is, there are rooms, it said, and a cover. So rooms are rooms. It probably made individual pens for a lot of the animals, some cages and gates. So then it says to cover the ark, both the inside and the outside, with, most versions say, pitch. But the interesting thing is cover and pitch are actually the same word in Hebrew, and the word is gopher. So we have gopher wood and we have gopher, covering the gopher. So I think it's kind of funny that they, a lot of times in scripture, do these little word plays, and it does show that the scripture authors were very intentional about their words, and this is meant to communicate God's words and what happened back in a time period where God wanted us to be familiar with the story from back then. So using those kinds of catchy rhythms and rhymes and words would have helped the Hebrews to remember more easily and memorize and meditate on what the story actually was. And this was one of the tools that they used. But going back to what all of it was and why it's important, basically, the wood was being covered with covering. So most versions, as we mentioned, said pitch, and then a lot of translations and commentaries talk about what pitch is, and it's essentially a bitumen or asphalt or tar and black sticky substance which bonds things, and when it is at its liquid point, then it ends up pouring into a certain area or over it, and you can smear it, which that's another translation for the word cover, to smear over. And so, when you use, for example, caulk on a wall, it smears over the surface of what you want to cover, and it helps fill in gaps, and it also helps you with whatever you're going to be building on the other side or painting over. And so this was also true. I even saw in a commentary before that essentially the word cover or pitch could be translated as caulk. But it also has some other interesting uses, which we won't get into, like how it also can be a covering, as in an atonement, as in when people talk about how Jesus' blood covers people. It's the same sort of concept and term, or how, you're covered under insurance, or, for our sake, we're covered under Jesus' blood because that payment of atonement ends up taking care of the wrong that we've committed. And so the covering and this sort of caulk or bitumen or tar substance was basically sealing the pieces of wood, and also even more so waterproofing it and giving it a even more integral sticking together, because it definitely needed a lot of bonding to be able to survive a horrible flood. And so using the gopher and the gopher together apparently was the perfect combination. Whatever kind of wood gopher was, whatever kind of specific pitch or caulk or whatever was being used to bond the wood together. It could have been some other form of glue that they had back then. All we know, it was essentially a covering for the pieces in between to help stick things together and coat the inside and the outside. This way, obviously, no water would be getting in and out. So then we go to the next part, and it talks about how he's supposed to make the ark 300 cubits. Then it says that the ark is supposed to be 300 cubits long or in length. And then it says that it's supposed to be 50 cubits wide and then 30 cubits tall. So we were talking about 450 feet earlier. How did we get that number? Well, let's talk about cubits for a second. So it's the measure usually from someone's arm to the end of their hand. So that's, for me, I measured mine out 16 inches, but it could range. And when you convert the average, it's approximately 18 inches, which is the equivalence of 1.5 feet. So, if you measure your arm right now, it's going to approximately come out to 1.5 feet. And so they were using this approximately 1.5 feet standard. So if you take those cubits, which are essentially 1.5 feet, and then you end up doing the conversion, you would need 450 feet to equal 300 cubits. So that's how you get that. And then, doing some other basic math, 50 cubits would be 75 feet. And then the 30 cubits would be 45 feet. So now if I converted the feet for everyone else outside of America who's listening, and in meters, that would be 137.16 feet long, and then it would be 22.86 meters wide, and then it would be 13.72 meters tall. So then this next part in verse 16, depending on the translation, can get really confusing. So now picture this big boat, ark, lifesaver vessel, and it says, "You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above." Now, what in the world is it talking about? So if you're just picturing it, this is the New King James. All right, a window, and you want me to put the window a cubit from the top. Okay. So I guess, just a window. But obviously, we haven't talked about, too much inside, or we haven't talked about technically the top of the ark. But if you look into it, there's a lot of versions that actually translate it as roof, because technically the word that's used for window or roof is actually midday or noon. So either they created a glorious window roof on the top made of glass, who knows? Or it's simply talking about the roof. And then what's, the talk about basically the finish that is supposed to be a cubit from above. So if you look at the verse, it says finish or complete it. That's supposed to end where the thing is a cubit above the rest of the thing. So it makes sense that it actually is a roof. And then you would be thinking, though, wait, if there's a roof above that's hanging and leaving a whole 18 inches or cubit gap, then that would let a lot of water in. They'd basically flood the whole boat and they'd end up sinking. But, it's possible that there was a pretty big overhang, or maybe they created vents so that minimal amount of water or moisture did end up coming in. And who knows if they had methods of possibly getting it back out, especially if they had the third deck just right next to that top area and layer right next to the roof with very little room. They could throw it right back out. Who knows what in the world they did. But yeah, if they had a lattice that was overhanging past the edges, it could just roll off, and it would also keep most, if not all, of the water from getting in, just as if you are under a little lattice that is an overhang of a roof on a building, and they kind of build a little bit extra room for people to stand under and have shelter from the elements if it's snowing or raining at a certain time of year. If you're going to work or school and they have a little area that overhangs the top, it would keep the rain from getting near the door, and you would be safe from the rain, even if it was going on an angle, even if there was a lot of wind that was blowing stuff in. It would cut almost, if not all of it, depending on how far out it overhung and on the angle and the amount it's hanging out. So it's possible that this is what it's talking about, basically leaving some room for air, or who knows exactly how they designed it. And it's possible that maybe they even had a little deck that they could have went on from the third floor with the opening or gap. It's possible they did even have a window or so, or other like openable doors, because it probably wasn't storming the entire time. Obviously, it was raging water and they were floating, especially during the beginning, but then it stopped raining after 40 days and nights. So after that, they probably, if they did have windows, would have opened them. And maybe they even opened the door at a point. It's possible. And got some extra fresh air, especially after being trapped in there with very little light for the 40 days and nights. And so, obviously, we haven't even talked about the flood, but it's clear that God is warning Noah that he wants him to build an ark, and we know that this is essentially Noah of the flood story. And so if we move down to even just the next verse in 17, it says, "Behold, I'm bringing flood waters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh." So basically, everything that's on the ground, even it says basically the heavens. So even the lower heavens, I guess you could say, like the lower atmosphere, even was technically filled with water because that's how much it flooded the earth. It said later on that even the highest peak was covered at one point. And so for that to happen, it's probable that, they even had a lot of the birds. It's possible some could have survived the period. But getting back, it then talks about a first, second, and third, or in other words, a lower, a middle, and an upper deck. As I was mentioning, there were 3 layers or decks. And so who knows what kind of stairs or ramp that they had, but obviously there was a lot of work that went into building this ark. So like I said earlier, it's probable that, of course, he would have had his sons, as you were mentioning, Dave, but then also it's possible that he hired some outside hands. They were probably just in it for the money. They probably, when doing a project like this, the fact that he was doing something so weird, he was literally, for example, if you've seen the movie Evan Almighty, God in a modern day movie asks this guy named Evan to build an ark, and he's highly ridiculed. And I can't imagine what kind of stuff Noah would have had to face. And I know you were talking about earlier, Dave, how Noah didn't really seem to flinch. It seems like he was just straight on and staying focused on what God was asking him to do. And he was. But yet at the same time, I'm sure that he had some pretty horrible days of persecution and mocking. And, you stand up for God on the work site, even when they allow you to have freedom of speech and you feel attacked verbally. I can only imagine what a bunch of evil people surrounding Noah were saying about him. Even the fact that Noah started the project is a testament of itself. The fact that he trusted God enough to even start something that would have got him in the public's eye. Like, he can't hide this 450-foot long boat that he's building. And when people ask him, what's it for? Oh, yeah, God's gonna flood the world because you guys are all corrupt. Like, what in the world did Noah say? Did he just keep it to himself? Like, oh, I just want to build a boathouse to live in. You'll find out later. Or, yeah, as you're about to die. Like, what in the world? Like, Noah realized and was connected with God and didn't let the things around him phase him or keep him from starting the project, and it didn't keep him, as we'll see, from finishing the project. And God helps see him through the whole way, and that's the kind of thing God's looking for. God is looking for righteous people, blameless people, like people who he can't find a fault with, like even if they have issues and stumble, like if in the end you're following through and doing the exact opposite of what Adam and Eve did, the exact opposite of what Cain and Abel did, as we mentioned in verse 22, it says that he did, like he actually did and obeyed and followed through, and he listened to God's instructions or commands, and he followed through and he executed them. He didn't just hear about them and be like, cool, thanks for telling me, God. Yeah, thanks for telling me to not eat from the tree. Oh, thanks for telling me that I have sin that's creeping up and going to destroy me and other people. He wasn't like, oh, God, thanks for telling me about the flood that's going to happen. Cool. Yeah, an ark. Yeah, thanks for all these dimensions and stuff. That sounds like a cool project. All right, well, cool. Thanks for being my God, and thank you that you're going to save me, even though I'm not even going to prepare or listen to anything you have to say. Like if Noah would not have listened to God, he would have died along with everyone else, because he would have been doing the very one thing that God is trying to teach people even from the beginning of the world, is to listen to him. Take time to hear his voice, and you can hear it if you listen to him and if you listen to his words through things like scripture. And sometimes God speaks through other people. And like I said, they didn't have a Bible, so they would have had to trust and really have known and connected with the one true God, with all of the other gods and idols and worship of people who could have been or posed as gods, like the pharaohs and other sort of ancient rulers. A lot of them essentially took on God status because they were the greatest person that the people knew, and they believed that they had, essentially, because of how they were living in the world, the embodiment of the gods and spirits that ended up making the world. But the difference with Noah is he actually knows the actual God and is listening to him. So now, getting close to the end, we talk about in verse 17, like we said, that God was going to bring floodwaters on the earth. So he has them somewhere, and he's going to bring them on the earth. So it's clear that they're not on the land, earth part yet. So, there was the waters in the sky. Like, what exactly was that? Like, we've talked about that before. But then there's also the water that's below and things like springs. So just imagine all of the water in the sky, all of the water below, instead of staying up in their respective spots, all collapsing back onto and covering the land. So God says that he's going to destroy everything under heaven, and that all the flesh on earth, everything that has the breath of life, like the thing that he gave specifically to the humans, he gave them ruach, and that's what God is taking away. And so obviously there's something wrong with these ruachs, like the spirit that is in the people living on earth now is no longer, it has nothing to do with God's breath and ruach that he gave them. Now it's basically the world's ruach, and the world's ruach is corrupt. The breath and life that's there, but also even the animals, kind of like mentioning a few minutes ago. But, who knows what kind of disturbing animal, or who knows, I've heard weird things like even hybrid animal-human mixes could have existed at that time. And if that's the case, like that needed to be put to an end. But whatever in the world was bad about the world back then, God was taking the thing, breath, that made life possible for all of these creatures, or a creature is a created thing, all flesh, everything that had meat and breath is basically going to lose the one thing that makes it alive, which is its breath. And God is taking that, and he's doing it by bringing flood waters. And it says that he is going to destroy. And when it talks about God destroying, it essentially is talking about how he's going to bring it to ruin, and like the very thing that has become corrupt, he's going to bring it to its completion or end. I guess he's going to corrupt the corrupt thing by letting it become its full corruption and destroy itself. But after the world is destroyed, wait, but remember earlier, but there was but Noah when everything was messed up and ruined, right? So, like, Noah's going to get to survive on this ark, right? Come on, at least Noah, like, he's a good guy. God says, just like we were talking about earlier. But, same thing we have here. It interjects and pulls out from all of the horrible and says, I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, the one that he wants to save, as we were talking about, not just him, but also his wife and his son's wives, even, as we mentioned before. And so, with that said, we have Noah's entire family, whether or not, they were the best people. Noah essentially was covering, or I guess, if you're talking in banking terms, he was co-signing for everyone. Like, his good credit got them all on the ark, whether or not, they were good people or deserved it. So God needed, a way for the next generation to happen. Because if he was the only guy, then like, who's going to be the next generation? Like, why would God just save him so that he can enjoy, another few years and then die alone, and then humanity doesn't survive anyways? It wouldn't make any sense. So God's having grace and extending it to a new generation, but things haven't come down yet. But what about the animals? It is what we're about to talk about next, but just giving a little bit of introduction to what God has to say for the animals. He ends up having, as we mentioned, for Noah, he has to take his wife. So, you need a male and a female minimum. So he takes at least one or more of each animal, and we'll talk more about the specifics later. But obviously you need that to reproduce afterwards and survive. And so that's what ends up happening. But just honing back in on this last detail, the fact that God trusts Noah and makes a covenant with him, he establishes and sets it up. And God is the one who originates it. I think that that's one of the most beautiful things. And the fact is that God actually sets up a lot of things and establishes a lot of things on this earth. And one of those things is he has already established and set up an opportunity for us all to be saved. And although saving shouldn't have been part of the plan, people were intended originally to have life and to have fruitfulness and fully able to enjoy it, have pleasure and paradise. But because of that getting messed up, God is trying to work with people that he could ally with and speak to people and help get them back on track. But every time God tries helping us, it seems like people don't want to listen. But here, there's a man who's listening to God. And now that humanity is losing their life, God is trying to still give it and preserve it, even though there's some that he has to destroy because they're essentially appropriating and spreading evil with no sight of end. And in people like that, sadly, God has to wipe them out and destroy them. And so today, if that's you, don't let it be, because he does offer salvation and he's given a way to be saved, even though there's not going to be a flood again, because we'll go over how he promised not to do that ever again. There's still another destruction that's coming, and everyone has to be prepared for that. Don't be caught up in it.
Well, anyway, to wrap it up, to finalize, because I don't want to go on in infinity, but we can kind of summarize what God is doing in the big picture. Isn't it? To me, it is a marvelous miracle that in this ark, in the salvation, if you will, of this family, there is the salvation of the world, including you and me. This is our salvation story, as it's part of the story of Jesus. We're going to be seeing this seed carried within Noah and one of his boys all the way to Bethlehem, and then our Savior is going to appear. Isn't that amazing? So in effect there is this ark of humanity carrying the hidden seed through, and we have only some of the names of the genealogy, but it is in God's eyes, it's hidden and it is glorious in His sight. I think in Matthew chapter 11, Jesus says this incredible prayer: Father, I thank you and praise you because you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned, and you've revealed them. God is continuing to do that. That's how He operates. He continues to work in secret. And every now and then, somebody gets a glimpse of it.
Hey, I'm so glad you guys could join for today's podcast. I hope things clicked for you and that you're able to better understand God's Word. Jesus said,
Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. So, keep on listening to what God has to say, and I'll see you guys next time. God bless.